to have you and to have our special guest. At the Canadian College of Health Leaders in Leeds, Canada, we are doing everything we can, especially during these difficult times, to support the work that you're doing in the world and to offer the things that are really needed given the times. Our newest initiative is the Campfire Chat series, where we bring in experts who can offer insight into key topics that are particularly relevant these days. And so this is our first of the Campfire Chat series, and we're very, very excited to introduce Dr. Peter Jensen. Dr. Jensen is a sports psychologist who has attended 9 Olympic Games as a member of Team Canada and has helped numerous elite athletes achieve high performance under intense pressure, including 4 consecutive medal-winning women's hockey teams, which we are very, very proud. He's a top-rated instructor at the Queen's Business School, the Smith School of Business, and was involved in designing the Queen's Executive Leadership Program. He's the author of 3 books, including The Inside Edge, and the founder of Third Factor, a world-class organization that provides leadership development programs in the field of coaching, collaboration, and resilience. So Dr. Jensen's topic today is leadership and resilience in a crisis, wisdom from Olympic champions. So from a purely logistical point of view, this is a conversational approach with Dr. Jensen, and there will be time for questions at the end. So you are most welcome to type those in, and we will field them in the last 15 minutes of today's chat. So welcome, Dr. Jensen, and thank you for coming. And I guess my first question is that given all the factors that go into elite performance, why is resilience so key?
Well, resilience is key, of course, because it allows you to exhibit what you're capable of. Let me take you back a little bit. Canada was sort of unique in the world in the sense that we were the only country not just to host 1 Olympics, but actually host 2 Olympics where we didn't win a gold medal. In 76 in Montreal, and of course 88 in Calgary. And yet by the time we got to Vancouver, we won numerous gold medals and have ever since. So what took place in the interval there? Well, what took place in the interval was we started to work on the mental domain. We started working on physical resilience. We started working on your ability to perform on demand, under pressure, and those skill sets. And we worked on them very diligently. Our conversion rate beforehand was 26%. That means that if you were a Canadian and you were in the top 5 in the world in any sport, whatever it was, at your world championship the year before, might be luge, might be rhythmical gymnastics, bobsled, what percentage of Canadians at the Olympics 1 year later came home with a medal? 26%. So you look across different countries and you see that Germany converts 91%. You see the Americans converted 104% in Salt Lake City. Well, that problem can only lie one place. Can't lie 2 places. If you can do 6 triple jumps in your morning practice as a figure skater, but you only get 1 out in the evening competition, it's not about the jumps. And so we started to work on resiliency, what I call mental fitness. And, you know, if you're going to get physically fit, what do you work on? Well, you work on cardiovascular endurance, you work on strength, you work on flexibility, you work on power. Well, what if you're going to get mentally fit? You're going to become more resilient. What do you work on? Well, you work on perspective, you work on imagery, you work definitely in the area of energy management, and you work on focus. Because ultimately, high performance is all about what are you paying attention to. So those are the key areas. But it's really interesting, you know, because if you had asked me even 20 years ago what I thought resiliency was, I would have spent a fair amount of time almost talking to you about a turtle shell, you know, like how do you protect yourself and not let things bother you so much? But of course, that's not what resiliency is at all. You know, if you think of a basketball is resilient because it regains its shape very quickly. And of course, if you stop and think what allows a basketball to regain its shape very quickly, you realize it's pressure. It's pressure that gives a basketball its bounce. And in many ways, it's pressure and competition and the need to get better or adjust or adapt that ultimately leads to us getting better as well. And so now when we think of resiliency, we more think about it as how quickly do you bounce back to being yourself? And I saw a great example of this up at the Toronto Rehab Center, where they were rehabbing an individual who had had a stroke. And, you know, I think if I had gone into that center quite a few years ago, they would have been talking about her building a wider base and stability and balance and all of those kinds of things. And instead, they had her hooked up to a gymnastic harness that went into a pulley in the ceiling. And she was walking on an uneven surface. And every once in a while, they would shove her to the side so that she was forced to regain her balance. And of course, what they're doing is training her to get back on balance. And so even physical resiliency, like mental resiliency, is about how quickly can you get back to being who you are and what you're capable of.
Do you have a favorite Olympic memory that stands out, Dr. Jensen?
They all have to do with overcoming. I mean, you think as a viewer, anybody who's on this Zoom call who has watched the Olympics, what are the real stories? They're the comeback stories. The overcome adversity. Silicon Laumann getting badly injured by being hit by a German boat 3 months before Barcelona and going through 2 or 3 surgeries and still coming home with a bronze medal. It's not always about the gold medal. It's almost always about coming back and recovery and all of those stories. It's the women's hockey team in Sochi being down by 2 goals with 3 minutes left in a hockey game and winning the gold medal. I mean, that's the stuff we remember. It's Crosby scoring in overtime. It's about the comeback. It's about the exhibiting that ability to produce when it matters most. And I think all memories are related to that stuff. And sometimes someone who finished way down the line, you know, or was just starting out. I remember working with Elizabeth Manley in, World Championships in Geneva, I don't know, 1985, somewhere around there. And she did really well, worked her all way, and she finished 5th and got to go on the world tour. Well, to me, that was like a huge highlight that eventually led to her, you know, doing what she did in Calgary. So it's just seeing people strive and thrive under pressure.
Can you talk a little bit about how resiliency is particularly important for some of the team captains who the other teammates look to, particularly in times of intense crisis or challenge?
Well, I would include all leaders. Anybody who has a leadership position, certainly them being resilient and acting with resiliency is so important to people under them, right? I mean, all of the great leaders are incredibly good at self-management. I mean, you've got to be able to manage yourself and your arousal level. If you don't, you lose it. I remember years ago, I was working with a large magazine company and doing a seminar, and they brought me in to work with a particular group because they had a huge turnover in that group. And once I got in there and started looking at it, I realized the problem was the manager, you know, because every time the pressure hit mid-month to sell the ads in the magazines, he would panic and he'd yell and scream and kick butt to achieve the numbers. And then he'd spend the first 2 weeks of the next month trying to repair all the relationships he damaged while hitting those numbers. And then he'd panic again. And actually the organization thought he was a really good leader because he hit his numbers. But then when they added all the costs in, the number of turnovers, the interviewing process, the ads they had to run, they began to realize not very effective as a leader. So as a leader, it's absolutely essential that you are resilient and are able to manage yourself and your energy level. That's why energy management, I think energy management is often overlooked as a skill set. You know, it's we get so hung up on time management, but that's limited, right? You got 24 hours in a day. That hasn't changed recently. And so always moving time around is not a way to deal with more stuff. You got to get much better at energy management because that's something you have control over. Anyway, that's another topic.
I think we love the Olympics, and we're going to have to wait another year for the next ones. But I think it's just so easy to admire Olympians, and they've got resolve and dedication that seems to kind of go beyond the average hardworking person. And you alluded to it with your newspaper example, but can you talk a bit about what works for Olympians and to become an Olympic champion? To what extent does that translate to other contexts?
Well, first of all, I mean, we don't have trophies. We don't have Olympic medals. We can move up, but not so much as we used to. There's not as many layers in organizations anymore. But, you know, actually, you know, it's surprising, like, because people will always go, oh my gosh, you get to work with an Olympic athlete. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. But when I'll give you an example. You know, when you're walking into a figure skating rink to work with Elvis Stoico, the figure skater, like what he has to do on a daily basis is profoundly boring and repetitive as hell. Like, and it's the stick-to-itiveness, the grit to stick with those things. And what helps them, of course, is the vision, where they're going. You know, they got a clear sense of where they're going. And when that disappears, it's interesting because we were talking to actually a figure skater yesterday, and that's gone. Like there's no love for the sport anymore. And once that disappears, forget it. You're not going that far without it. But yeah, there is that incredible discipline to stick with things. And of course, developing the mental tenacity to be able to do that day after day after day after day. And you see how it translates. I mean, two of the athletes I worked with are now, well, one's graduated this spring with a medical degree, Joanna Rachet, and the other one, Haley Wickenheiser, is partway through her medical training and has been doing wonderful things throughout this COVID, of course. But it's the same habits. Like they love routine. And so they're tailor-made for things like medicine because they're so disciplined.
So we'd be remiss not to recognize that these are unusual times for everyone, and there are strains on people now that are even hard to acknowledge. I think that some are obvious and others are a little bit more latent. Can you talk about what your sense of how resilience affects dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and what people need in particular during these times?
Oh, for sure. I mean, this is when resiliency is most critical, right? Resiliency is not for the times when things are going really well. That's not when you learn. You know, you learn almost always when there's a dip in the line upward, right? Doug Lee, the figure skating coach, when he was dealing with his second bout of cancer, said to me one time, most of life's lessons are not very friendly. And I think that's very, very true, you know, very, very true. I'm doing a series of 3 little short vignettes for leaders in healthcare right now. Actually, I did one yesterday. I have one after this, and I have one tomorrow. And it's an organization that's in charge of, you know, many, many, many seniors' homes across the country. And you know, those people are highly stretched. And so, one of the things I was talking to them about was that when you are not in a normal environment, when the environment is abnormal, as strange as this sounds, you have to be willing to can't act normal to deal with abnormal environments. And back in 2010, I went through a cancer treatment program at Princess Margaret. And I remember one day I was sitting in the waiting room. I had the 35 radiation treatments, that sort of stuff. And this woman who I'd seen in there many times came over and sat down beside me, and she introduced herself, and she asked me what kind of cancer I had. I had throat cancer, and she said, oh, and she talked to me about her cancer a bit, and then she turned to me and she said, do you know what my cancer has taught me? And I said, no, I don't. Not good at mind reading yet. And she said, well, my cancer has taught me that normal optimism will not do. I had to upgrade my ability at being optimistic because I'm not in a normal environment. And you know, that's acting abnormal, right? And when we started to talk yesterday about, with the healthcare workers, what is abnormal? You know, so for example, stopping in the middle of your day and just going inside and saying, what am I thinking right now? You know? And is it helpful or not helpful? Right? You didn't do that when everything was running smoothly, but now, good idea, you know? Or slipping inside and saying, okay, how am I thinking about this? Am I worrying about this? Am I just churning, overthinking this? Or am I problem solving? If you're problem solving, move along. But if you're just turning the wheels without anything concrete, and my mother used to say, worry if it'll make a difference. I was listening to a woman last week, Amy Moore, and she did a TED Talk, had 11 million views. And she was talking about how nervous she got about it, and she rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it. And other people were saying to her, oh, for crying out loud, it's got to look natural. It's got to be this, got to be that. And she said, but I worried about it. So in worrying about it, I did something about it. I rehearsed. And she said, I am so glad I did. I was nervous through the presentation, but it went really well. And it only went well because I worried about it, and then I problem solved around the worry, you know? And acting abnormal, I'll tell you a story about a guy named James Gill, who was a medical doctor, Dr. James Gill. And he's the only man in the world ever, all time, to do 6 double Ironmans, okay? Now that's ludicrous. You know, do one on Saturday, one on Sunday, right? So you're doing a marathon both days, you're biking, whatever it is, 100 kilometers or whatever, both days, you're swimming 3 kilometers, you know? And he was 59 years of age when he did the last one, right? And so they asked him, you know, how did you do that? What did you learn? And I love what he said. And I've got it written on a piece of paper here because I don't want to screw it up. He said, I learned to talk to myself instead of listen to myself. And they said, what do you mean? He said, well, if you listen to yourself, the mind is going to make up all kinds of stories about doubt and fear and worry and why you can't do this and how tired your legs are from the day before, all of those kinds of things. But when you talk to yourself, in his words, I fed myself with words of encouragement that I needed. That's acting abnormal. Supporting himself, you know? I was listening to a guy named John Gordon. I'm listening to about 20 minutes a day to develop my own resiliency and my own skill sets and things, because it's a great thing to do at a time like this. I always remember Obama's chief of staff in 2008. He said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And one of the things I've been talking to the athletes about, because I sit on the COVID crisis team for the COC, is don't waste this time. Like, everything you need is there. You got uncertainty, you got worry, you got doubt. Like, this is a great time to work on your resiliency. Like, everything you need is in front of you. I said to them, you know, my father, I will get back to that other story, trust me. My father worked 42 years underground in a mine in northern Quebec. And so my dad never had to search out ways to get physical fit. It just came with his life, the way he worked. Well, we don't have to look in healthcare. Do we have to look anywhere to find ways, the challenges to get mentally fit with? Oh my gosh, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. There's never a better time to work on it. And so this fellow, John Gordon, was saying, you know, if you think about it, you know, you think about fear and you think about faith. You think about those two things. Actually, he said they have one thing in common. They're both creating a vision of the future that hasn't even happened yet. Fear creates one vision and faith creates another vision. And neither one of them are factual. It's all in our head, you know? And his point is, so if you're going to listen to one, you might as well listen to the faith one, because there's no margin in listening to the other one, you know?
Yeah, I hadn't heard that analogy before. What a fantastic one it is, definitely.
It is a great one. Little things like that I find very helpful.
And so you've mentioned many. What if you had to summarize the key characteristics of resiliency? How would you sink that down?
Oh, I think it's just this simple. It's being able to get out your capabilities when they matter most. Like, can you access all of your ability? Because sometimes we leave situations and maybe we didn't manage our arousal level well, right? And so we blurted out, or we said something, or we did this, or we that. And, you know, often you're 10 minutes out of that room and you're saying to yourself, oh my God, when I said that, why didn't I say this? And so it's not that you don't know. It means you can't access it. You know, you've got to be able to access your capabilities. And when arousal level gets too high, attentional focus narrows. I mean, you have no choice over this. You know, when someone is extremely upset or angry, and often we'll say, you know what, I'm going to wait until she calms down, then I'll go talk to her. That's just good common sense, because we know arousal level, narrow, focus. In sport, by the way, we call it choking. But it's the same thing. Narrow arousal level, missing critical information, left a sponge inside. Oh, God. Well, I was so uptight about this. Oh, yeah.
I think that the learning from either whether failures or just real hardships is something I've heard you stress before in talks, where I distinctly remember a story you told many years ago in a keynote about an athlete who had just lost and was on the bike, and you were about to go console her and were held back and said, why would you deprive her of this opportunity to process it herself first and then come back? Can you talk a little bit about maybe that story, or just anything to the effect of when there are tough times, either we've made mistakes or we really haven't, but it's been a tough day, how important it is to make those into learning experiences and developmental opportunities?
Okay, well, let me back up and tell you where I learned this. You were talking about Christine Nesbitt and her coach Yuli Wang there, and I will come to that, but I want to go by way of Kazimierz Dąbrowski. So Dr. Dąbrowski was a Polish psychiatrist who was interned in the Second World War for a while, got out, he had a children's clinic. He was a contemporary of Freud and Jung. And when the Russians came in after the war, it didn't get much better for him. And he finally got to Canada, and he was in his late 70s. And when I did my PhD at the University of Alberta back in the mid-70s, I had the great occasion to study and work with Dąbrowski for a year and a half. And his theory was called the theory of positive disintegration. So positive disintegration is those times in life where things become hard, you work, it goes down. It's what Carl Jung probably would have called, well, not probably, called the long dark night of the soul. You know, where you look in and figure out and you sort yourself out, and you come out at a little higher level, which is why he called it positive disintegration. Negative disintegration would be more mental illness, but positive disintegration is this ability to come out. Now, Dąbrowski spent a lifetime writing about this and analyzing it, and he generated a concept that I love, and his concept was of the third factor. You know, his thing was that, you know, when we look at great leaders, for example, are they born or are they raised? Are they developed or, you know, and it's the long-standing nature-nurture argument. And at that time at the University of Alberta, the behaviorists had won the day. And so the nurture part was all over the place, and behavior modification programs and all of that sort of stuff. And one day, Dąbrowski was a very quiet man, and, you know, not just a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. He had a PhD, he spoke English and French fluently, amazing man. And he said to me one day about the other psychologists, he said, you know, they're nice people, but they're missing the point. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, they're missing the point. He said, there's nature, nurture, and then there's third factor. And the third factor, in his words, was the autonomous power of the individual to move beyond his or her environmental or genetic abilities. In other words, to transcend. And so you studied like Nelson Mandela, or you studied Helen Keller, or all of those people, and what you discovered was they went through very difficult times and rose out of it, yes, with some influences from others, but a lot from themselves. And he dug deeper into that, and what he discovered was that the way transformation occurs in individuals is not through logic. Like if logic changed people, no one would smoke, everybody would eat properly, you know, everybody would exercise, but logic doesn't change people. Emotion and imagination change people, you know? And often, quite frankly, it isn't until you're totally dissatisfied with something that you finally move away from what is to what you'd like to be, right? And so I always think of emotion as a push out of somewhere. And I think of imagination as a pull towards something. The image we were talking about, the athlete's hold, for example, you know, because your body doesn't speak English, your body speaks image, of course. And so those are the two things I encourage leaders to work with. And so that day with Christine Nesbitt, that was at the Torino Olympics. 2 years before Torino, I had done a work with all the athletes and coaches in Lake Louise in a program that was then called the Program of Excellence, now is called On the Podium. Right? But On the Podium did not exist at that point. This was the first fledgling into that area. And so when I got to the Olympics in Torino, not only did I have the women's hockey team and Jen Heil and Joanne Rochette and Jeffrey Buttle and some athletes, but I was the lead sports psych person for the COC, and I'm currently co-lead that as well now. And so my job at the Olympics was to go around to the venues and see, well, what kind of pressures are there? How should we be preparing these people to be more resilient? Because it won't be identical in long track speed skating as it is in hockey, because hockey is a team sport. You can muck up and somebody else can save you. That's not true of a figure skating, right? And so I went over to long track one day to watch it, and Christine Nesbitt was skating 1,000 meters, and she finished 11th. And now we're under the arena. I didn't work with her, and I'm sitting with Julie Wang, her coach at the time. And Christine's in the back corner pedaling the bike, getting rid of some lactic acid. She's in physical pain, but mostly emotional pain because she's not happy with where she finished. And she's crying and she's upset. And the young sports psychologist out of Calgary I'm there to see comes by, and he stops to say hello, and then he sees Christine on the bike, and he says, "Excuse me for a minute." And that's when Yuli reached out and grabbed his arm and said to him, and you have a good memory, said to him, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Oh, I'm going to help her feel better. It's her first Olympics. Come on, give her a break, blah, blah, blah." And Yuli said, "Why would you rob her of this moment? Let her have the experience of her results. Leave her be. You can go over there in an hour." And to me, this is a coach who gets it. Should not mean-spirited at all. Not at all. But where's the drive and the energy going to come from to make the change, to transition out of where she is to what ought to be? And, by the time she gets to Vancouver, she's the gold medalist. But the fact of the matter is, this is an important lesson, and it would be really, really good if our school systems got it. We spend way too much time protecting people from disappointment and failure. We stake trees way too long, metaphorically speaking. And so, yeah, the coaches I work with, they don't fear emotion. When someone's upset, or they don't fear it at all. It's a way to channel. I've used emotion. Oh my gosh, I can think of the women's hockey team at a World Championships in Burlington, Vermont. We lost to the Americans 9-2 in the opening game in the U.S. Can you imagine that arena? USA, I mean, it was unbelievable. And they were just that. No team had ever lost 9-2 to the Americans, men or women. And so afterwards, they were just shattered. And the coaches said to me, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "Nothing. We're going to let them sleep on it. We're playing Finland tomorrow afternoon. I'll meet with them in the morning briefly, but we'll do something tomorrow night." And, we worked through that. And every practice, I took 1 minute of practice time at the start, every weight room, every situation, and just reminded them, of how you feeling? What are you going to do about that? How are you going to, where's this? And, 8 days later, in overtime, we beat the Americans and win the World Championship. Same team, but, just working on emotion, because emotion is transformative. Mm-hmm. This. I mean, Cotter at Harvard has shown very clearly. People think it's think, analyze, and change. No, it isn't. It's see, feel, and change. It's different. Yeah.
And what did they do in between the first American game and the Finland game?
Oh, they had there was a football field right across the way. It was a small Burlington, Vermont's not very big. So we were sort of in a hotel there, and we walked out the door, and it was a football field, and we were doing dry land training. And that was funny because they were all standing around in the lobby, and oh my God, you'd swear they, like everybody close to them had died or something. They were just head down. And I said to them, "You look awful." And they said, "Well, yeah, you wouldn't believe all the tweets I got last night, and you wouldn't believe the texts, and you wouldn't believe my mother wrote." So I said, "Yeah, what are you going to do with your disappointment? Where are you going to put it? Like, you can talk to each other about how bad it is, what Joan Boroshenko from the Harvard Medical School once called awfulizing," which I love that word. And, and she said, that won't take you anywhere. I love the way Ben Zandler, the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic, talks about that. He says, "Oh yeah, that's the conversation of no possibilities." But it draws you close to people because we're both complaining about the same thing, whereas, what are you going to do with it? So they said, "What do you mean?" So I said to the strength coach, Adam Douglas, I said, "Adam, what are you doing first?" He said, "Lunges." So I said to the players, what are you going to do in those lunges that let your teammates know I'm back? I'm back. I'm back. And it's funny because that day, I hope we got time for this. That day, our video coach, a guy named Jory, who's with the Oilers now, but he was, he collects hockey sweaters, like signed hockey. He wasn't married, obviously, because he had about 30 of them. And and there was a little gift shop down in the lobby. And I seen him at breakfast and he was all excited. I said, what are you so excited about? Oh, I just got Stamkos' jersey, authentic jersey signed, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I said, what'd you pay for it? He said, $88. I mean, can you believe that? In Edmonton, this would have cost me $250. So just before we went to the football field, now you got to remember, these women know me very, very well. And so they're used to my obtuse questions. And so I said to the players, I said, Jory bought a new hockey sweater this morning. Stamkos, signed sweater. Why did you buy that? And they look at me like, oh, what are you doing? They call me PJ. What are you doing? You know, like, oh, do we have to? I said, think about it. Why did he buy the sweater? So somebody says, he likes Stamkos. I said, he likes Stamkos, but that's not the real reason. No. So finally, one of the players, because they know I'm like a dog on a bone, I'm not going to let it go. So finally somebody says, I don't know. It was a decent price. So I turned to Jory and said, was it a good price? Oh, it was a great price. I said, yeah, that's why I bought it. It was a great price. You see, he knows what jerseys are worth, so he doesn't overpay for them. You lost to the Americans last night, 9-2. Yeah. Don't overpay for that. Don't overpay for it. Like, would you go into a clothing store and pay 3 times as much as they're charging for the item? No, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that. You know, you lost the hockey game. That's bad enough. You start to lose confidence. You start to lose belief in yourself. You're overpaying. You're overpaying. What we're going to do here, we're going to turn things around. We're going to start to build up. And we're going to start with what we're going to do over there on that football field. And we're going to take it back up. And every practice, every weight session, everything, we're going to just keep moving in the direction we need to go in. Anyway.
Another story I remember you telling from a different keynote. Similarly, I heard Sir Clive Woodward, the coach of the English rugby team that won the World Championship. Talked about how in life being obsessive has negative connotations. Whereas he said at the Olympic level, men's and women's downhill, the difference between the gold medal greatest person we've ever seen and 25th is like a second.
Yeah.
And if you're not obsessive about success in that realm, you're never going to be successful. And you had a similar anecdote about saying to an Olympian, is there anything you wouldn't do in the gym or in the football field that would help your chances of winning a medal? And implying that's the commitment that they demonstrate. And I think that was such a beautiful story that you told about how important it is to stay focused and to not, as you said, go down the dark hole.
Well, that's what you're paying. What are you paying attention to? Like, are you paying attention to things that help you perform really well? And I don't, listen, you're dealing with all kinds of people who are like those athletes. They're high performers. You don't become a medical doctor without being a high performer, without being obsessive. I mean, I have a daughter who's one. I can assure you, she's obsessive and she's totally focused on what she's doing, right? And she's totally into this whole crisis right now because she's the CMO at her hospital as well. And so, yeah. But it all boils down to, are you paying attention, for example, to the thoughts in your head that lead you down a rabbit hole that's not very productive? Are you focusing on the cues that allow you to perform really well? And that's a discipline. That's a discipline.
And for the nurses and doctors and other healthcare professionals who are on the call today, what are some really practical ways that they can develop their own resiliency?
Well, I think one of the things, because I'm in the same camp as they are, right? I've got too much formal education as well. And so let's take emotions, for example, when we're going through emotions. Our great tendency is to try to talk to ourselves, logically reason and talk ourselves out of things, right? When in fact, we're way better off to bypass the brain right now. Because the brain is not of tremendous assistance in working through. Why? Because we don't need data. Like, we don't know if there's a second wave, a third wave. Do people have immunity? Don't they have immunity if they've had it? And then what's your current status right at this moment? Like, you don't have a lot of the data to do all that sort of stuff. And so sometimes you're better off just to bypass the mind completely and go to the body. See, because your body, first of all, the body's always in the present. That's certainly not true of the mind, but the body's always in the present moment, right? And so if you go into your body and you just take a moment and go inside and notice what you're feeling, and you'll be very familiar with that. I would say it's like an old friend, but it's not always a friend, but you know what I mean? You'll notice the tightness, that's fear, or you'll notice the, the grief, or what, because I mean, what happens is we all go through Kubler-Ross's stages, and sometimes we go through them in an hour, we go through all of them and then move back to acceptance, right? And so just notice it, and then breathe. Like, just learn a simple breathing technique, or just stop and focus on your breath or two. You know what happens? You come back to being yourself. You come home, because there's no point in going into the mind level right now. Going into the body level, a lot easier.
I want to make sure.
Simple little things, but they work so well.
Great.
Well, I'm just saying the simple things work really well. Like, to me, learning to manage your energy is critical. Like, it's just critical. It's a critical skill. This is a meta skill. It's going to serve you the rest of your life, okay? I think the resiliency skills are like the laws of physics. I mean, they apply everywhere. Yeah, they work on the golf course, but they also work in parenting. They also work in medicine. They also work in any challenging situation where the need for excellence and uncertainty are equally present. That's where they work. And gosh knows, we got a lot of that right now.
I'm now looking at the question box as we go. And so two people have asked the question that you just answered about how to develop resiliency in yourself. There was a question about how increased age impacts on resilience.
Well, you're asking a 73-year-old that question. I would say that in certain aspects of my life, I am way more resilient now than I ever was because I worked very hard on it. I did a 10-day total silence meditation program. I ate, I had a run this morning. But I also noticed that as I age, for example, I get more impatient. I get a lot more impatient. And so I have to counteract that. And that's a physiological thing in me. And it was present in my uncles, and it was present in my family, but I have to adapt a little differently and recognize, that's just this. Okay? Because you have to recognize, I mean, this is going to sound so strange to you, but you have to recognize that you are not your mind. The mind makes up all kinds of stories all the time. Most of it not very factual. Right? You are yourself, and the self is the part of you that can observe your mind and your body and your feelings. It's that neutral observer that Roberto Assagioli, the Italian psychiatrist, talked about. Or in Buddhistic thought, that part of you that observes, that sees, that knows, that is aware. And I think as you get older, anything that enhances your awareness. And I don't think, like most people, are not going to go away and do a 10-day total silence meditation program, nor do they have to, all right? But finding ways of dripping it in. Pete Carroll, who coaches the Seattle Seahawks in the NFL, he talks about, just dripping the stuff in, just doing a little piece here and a little piece there. And so, for example, find a little breathing app for your iPhone, and do breathing for 5 minutes a day. You can buy an app for your iPhone. It's called Heart Rate with a plus sign, and you buy the coherency one. And this is like a little biofeedback machine that, 15 years ago would have cost you $20,000, and now it's $4.90 or something. And you put your finger on the camera lens, and it picks up your heart rate. All right? And then it gives you a breathing pattern, a double set of hills on the bottom of the screen. because what does biofeedback tell us? Biofeedback tells us that when you breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 6 seconds, the body moves into a very relaxed, highly focused state. All right. Herbert Benson at the Harvard Medical School wrote a book called The Relaxation Response on just that stuff and a lot of other stuff, of course. And so it's kind of neat because you do this and you just follow it. And what starts to happen in the middle of the screen on your iPhone is this little hill starts to rise up. And that's the coherency measure. That's the measure of how synchronized, the synchronicity between your heart rate and your respiration rate. Now, you may say, well, geez, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. I mean, come on, that's 6 breaths a minute. Yeah, it is. And right now, you and I are at between 9 and 11. So anytime exhalation exceeds inhalation, you begin to relax. It's just physiology, right? And when you breathe deeper, you bring in more carbon dioxide and you balance out oxygen and carbon dioxide better, and you're not so jittery. I mean, when we're hyper. Like right? I mean, it's all, so it's a simple little thing, and it will chart your history, and you'll see how you get better over time. And what that will help, and on a day-to-day basis, you know, when you pull off to the side and just go, just a minute, pull yourself, you got time for 2 breaths. You take a couple of breaths, now you're more trained. Now you'll go down a lot lower. You'll get more relaxed, which will allow you to be much more functional.
It's interesting it's interesting to consider sports, the sports that I played, hockey, football, rugby. You have hockey and football, you have time to come off the ice and think, and then go back on, versus a sport like rowing where you're constantly on. What you're talking about reminds me a little bit of the theater convention taking a Brechtian moment where characters will step to the side and comment. And it's a bit like doing that with yourself. It's many of the things you're saying is observing how you're acting from a more removed, objective way.
Oh, and let me tell you a little bit about that. May I?
Of course, yeah.
Because this is something I heard last week, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so good. When LeBron James went to Miami Heat from Cleveland, and obviously a lot of people in Cleveland were not happy that he chose to sign with Miami. And so when they interviewed him about it, he would say things like this: LeBron James needs to decide what LeBron James needs to do in order to make LeBron James happy. And they all thought, why is he talking to himself in the third person like that? And yet now when we look at that, we go, man, that's clever. Because when you sit down and say, okay, and let's say you're sitting in front of your TV and you're being overloaded with so much information or misinformation or both from all kinds of different channels, and you're going, hold it. Jason Gertz needs to get up out of his chair, and Jason needs to go in the kitchen, and he needs to do this, and this. You put distance. You put a little distance between you and the emotion, right? And you give yourself better advice. And so internally, it's a kind of a neat thing to do. Because I think, and we haven't talked about this because I've been all over the map, but I would say in this crisis, I would say the number one thing that you need to engage in order to be resilient is psychological hygiene. Physical hygiene, that's been laid out pretty clearly to us. It's the 2 meters, it's the masks, it's gloves, it's all kinds of things, right? But what about psychological hygiene? Because we can get contaminated by over-information, other people's emotions. I mean, emotions are like a virus, like they're very contagious, And so learning to engage in psychological hygiene and sort of go, hold on, I'm not catching that. Like, I'm sorry he's got that disease right now, but I'm not listening to that. There's somebody spouting awfulizing about this and this, or trying to take it down a downward spiral. The metaphor I use in energy when I'm teaching energy management is I always tell people, you want to be a thermostat, you don't want to be a thermometer. You set the thermostat The thermometer goes to whatever the temperature is in the environment, whether it's down or up. And whereas, you know, the thermostat you set, you know. So when Steve Podgorski, you know, was going on the chairlift up the downhill to do his downhill, depending on the course, a little lower at Kip School, a little higher elsewhere, he knew he wanted to be in his own internal scale. He wanted his arousal level to be between 7 and 7.5. And so he worked at things to get it there, most often bringing it down. In training, or other days when he was flat, learning to take it up. But yeah.
What you're saying too reminds me of the most helpful coaching question I've ever heard. I was explaining a situation, and this person said to me, Jason, if you were hired as a consultant to advise yourself on this situation, what would you say? And it was so effective, because instead of just dumping my problems on this other person, we were able to come up with it in a way that, too, like all the things that you're saying about being a little bit removed, observing, being less in your head. There have been 3 questions in a row that are asking for you to talk a little bit more about energy management and how we can do that, especially when we've got stress-related fatigue that's happening all over the place.
Well, I think first and foremost, check in with yourself. Like, just pull off to the side and say, where am I at right now? You know, because sometimes, I mean, think of energy management in a house. Like, if you're going to do an analysis of your home in terms of its efficiency, energy efficiencies, what do you look for? You look for leaks. Like, where does energy leak away that's useless? Or do you leave the lights on in a room? Or do you open the window? Or you know, as your mother always said, do you stand there with the fridge door open? You know? And think of the equivalency of those kinds of things, you know?
You're heating the whole neighborhood.
Well, think about it. Yeah. But think of when you've left a meeting, for example, and you're still upset about that meeting 2 hours later. Like, that's like you've left all the lights on in the house and you've gone away. Like, it's there. Like, park that over there. But you see, the key is to catch yourself. Often you don't have to learn anything. You just need to be aware. You know, when I'm in a workshop sometimes and someone will say, well, what do you mean about awareness? And so I'll say, well, everybody close your eyes. And I'll say, okay, just become aware of your forehead now. Notice your jaw muscles. Notice your shoulders. And then I'll just say to the class, okay, what happened? Well, I noticed my forehead was tight. What'd you do? I let it go, yeah. Did I have to teach you anything? I didn't have to teach you anything. Awareness in and of itself is a skill. And so, number one thing for energy management is every once in a while, stop and check in with yourself. Where are you at right now? You need to come down, you need to go up. Most often, you need to come down. But sometimes it's the middle of the afternoon and you're flat. And so you say, what should I do? Well, you don't go talk to the black hole in the office. You don't go talk to the person who sucks energy out of your system, right? You need an uplift. You go and talk to someone who's going to give you that boost, not someone who's going to take you down, right? And I would say, if at all possible, even if it's just for a few minutes, get outside. Nothing energizes you like getting outside. Walk around the block, like just do anything to get outside. And, you know, in calmer times, you know, people will object and say, well, I can't get outside. You know, you're asking me to go outside every 90 minutes. You're asking me to break my day up. Yeah, because, you know, as you know, sleep occurs in 90-minute cycles, and we got to break things up. And we're not marathoners, we're sprinters. And once that working glucose disappears in your brain, you're not going to be as effective. So sharpen the saw, take the saw out of the wood. So people will object to me and they go, oh, you know, we don't have time, or it's not in our culture. And I always give them the same advice. I say, take up smoking. And they go, what? Take up smoking. Smokers have no trouble getting outside every 90 minutes. So take up smoking, but just don't do the smoking part.
We have just a few minutes, so maybe one last question would be, you've talked a lot with very helpful tips on developing our own resiliency. For those who are in leadership roles, formal positions. What are some things we can do to help develop resiliency in our teams or those who report to us or work with us?
Well, you talked earlier about the question that you got in that coaching session. You know, I would pull up to someone who's, you know, agitated or, you know, looks like they're not managing things really well for themselves, and say, okay, how are you doing right now? What are you going through? You know, and that would lead me to this question, you know, what is the one thing that if you did it different or better would make all the difference in the world right now to what you're going through, you know? And then help them quickly come up with a little plan, not go up and give them advice. Oh, I do this, you should do that. No, let them see. Or, you know, who do you know who does a really good job? Oh, my wife's really good at it. Then talk to her. Because you know how many skill sets there are? You think of any work group in a hospital. Do you know how many skill sets people have that they never talk about? Because they just think everybody else has these. Why? Because they're internal. Like you can't see them, right? And yet when people make the attribution for success or failure, whether it's sport or whether it's like, where do they make the attribution? To something mental. I wasn't ready. I felt under pressure. I thought they weren't listening, right? I mean, athletes do that all the time. And, you know, when I ask them, well, how much time do you spend on physical fitness? They look at me like, well, are you crazy? I mean, I spend 30 to 40 hours a week, directly or indirectly. Yeah. Yeah. And yet when you get to competition, what percentage of it is mental? Oh, it's at least 80%. Huh, how much time are you spending there?
Wonderful. Thank you. So I think we're almost out of time. So we want to thank everyone very much for tuning in. And just as a friendly reminder, this is the first in a series of chats. So next week, Thursday, May 6th, we've got Karen Bailey, who's the CEO of Menno Place, is a care campus for 700 seniors and 600 staff in BC. And Karen will be talking about leadership in long-term care when it matters most. And then in addition to that, tomorrow, the college is hosting a webinar with Dr. David Butler-Jones, former Chief Public Health Officer of Canada and Deputy Minister for the Public Health Agency of Canada between 2004 and 2014, reviewing the experiences of pandemics over the past 100 years and lessons learned from recent pandemic events and public health emergencies. So that's tomorrow. We will be emailing you a link to the recording to today's chat with Dr. Jensen, as well as a link to Third Factor, his organization, and we can learn more about what Dr. Jensen can do and his son Dane, the CEO, to support the work that you are doing. And then eventually we'll have a one-page summary of today too that will be emailed to you as well. So the very last thing, if there's anything else at the college or Leeds Canada that we can do to support you during these times or beyond, please let us know. That is how we've devoted our careers, to supporting you. So thank you so much, Dr. Jensen, for joining. It has been a real pleasure. I've looked forward to this since the time you agreed, and you certainly rose to the occasion. So I really appreciate it. And so on behalf of the Canadian College of Health Leaders and Leeds Canada, resilience, the wisdom from Olympic champions, we're in this together, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you very much. Until next time.